Hello and welcome to Being Prodigy. Now put on your headphones and start learning. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description.
The making of a global world. The pre-modern world. When we talk of globalization, we often refer to an economic system that has emerged since the last 50 years or so. But as you will see in this chapter, the making of the global world has a long history of trade, of migration, of people in search of work, the movement of capital, and much else. As we think about the dramatic and visible signs of global interconnectedness in our lives today, we need to understand the phases through which this world in which we live has emerged. All through history, human societies have become steadily more interlinked. From ancient times, travelers, traders, priests and pilgrims traveled vast distances for knowledge, opportunity and spiritual fulfillment, or to escape persecution. They carried goods, money, values, skills, ideas, inventions, and even germs and diseases. As early as 3000 BCE, an active coastal trade linked the Indus Valley civilizations with present-day West Asia. For more than a millennia, cowries, the Hindi county or seashells, used as a form of currency, from the Maldives found their way to China and East Africa. The long-distance spread of disease-carrying germs may be traced as far back as the 7th century. By the 13th century, it had become an unmistakable link. Silk routes link the world. The Silk routes are a good example of vibrant pre-modern trade and cultural links between distant parts of the world. The name Silk routes points to the importance of westbound Chinese silk cargoes along this route. Historians have identified several silk routes, overland and by sea, knitting together vast regions of Asia, and linking Asia with Europe and northern Africa. They are known to have existed since before the Christian era and thrived almost till the 15th century. But Chinese pottery also traveled the same route, as did textiles and spices from India and Southeast Asia. In return, precious metals, gold and silver, flowed from Europe to Asia. Trade and cultural exchange always went hand in hand. Early Christian missionaries almost certainly traveled this route to Asia, as did early Muslim preachers a few centuries later. Much before all this, Buddhism emerged from eastern India and spread in several directions through intersecting points on the Silk routes. Food travels. Spaghetti and potato food offers many examples of long-distance cultural exchange.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description. And please subscribe to show your support.
Traders and travelers introduced new crops to the lands they traveled. Even ready foodstuff in distant parts of the world might share common origins. Take spaghetti and noodles. It is believed that noodles traveled west from China to become spaghetti. Or, perhaps Arab traders took pasta to 5th century Sicily, an island now in Italy. Similar foods were also known in India and Japan, so the truth about their origins may never be known. Yet such guesswork suggests the possibilities of long-distance cultural contact even in the pre-modern world. Many of our common foods such as potatoes, soya, groundnuts, maize, tomatoes, chilies, sweet potatoes, and so on were not known to our ancestors until about 5 centuries ago. These foods were only introduced in Europe and Asia after Christopher Columbus accidentally discovered the vast continent that would later become known as the Americas. Here we will use America to describe North America, South America and the Caribbean. In fact, many of our common foods came from America's original inhabitants, the American Indians. Sometimes the new crops could make the difference between life and death. Europe's poor began to eat better and live longer with the introduction of the humble potato. Ireland's poorest peasants became so dependent on potatoes that when disease destroyed the potato crop in the mid-1840s, hundreds of thousands died of starvation. Conquest, disease and trade. The pre-modern world shrank greatly in the 16th century after European sailors found a sea route to Asia and also successfully crossed the Western Ocean to America. For centuries before, the Indian Ocean had known a bustling trade, with goods, people, knowledge, customs, etc. crisscrossing its waters. The Indian subcontinent was central to these flows and a crucial point in their networks. The entry of the Europeans helped expand or redirect some of these flows towards Europe. Before its discovery, America had been cut off from regular contact with the rest of the world for millions of years. But from the 16th century, its vast lands and abundant crops and minerals began to transform trade and lives everywhere.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, Just contact us through the link in the description, and please subscribe to show your support.
Precious metals, particularly silver, from mines located in present-day Peru and Mexico also enhanced Europe's wealth and financed its trade with Asia. Legends spread in 17th century Europe about South America's fabled wealth. Many expeditions set off in search of El Dorado, the fabled city of gold. The Portuguese and Spanish conquest and colonization of America was decisively underway by the mid-16th century. European conquest was not just the result of superior firepower. In fact, the most powerful weapon of the Spanish conquerors was not a conventional military weapon at all. It was the germs such as those of smallpox that they carried on their person. Because of their long isolation, America's original inhabitants had no immunity against these diseases that came from Europe. Smallpox in particular proved a deadly killer. Once introduced, it spread deep into the continent, ahead even of any Europeans reaching there. It killed and decimated whole communities, paving the way for conquest. Guns could be bought or captured and turned against the invaders, but not diseases such as smallpox to which the conquerors were mostly immune. Until the 19th century, poverty and hunger were common in Europe. Cities were crowded and deadly diseases were widespread. Religious conflicts were common, and religious dissenters were persecuted. Thousands therefore fled Europe for America. Here, by the 18th century, plantations worked by slaves captured in Africa were growing cotton and sugar for European markets. Until well into the 18th century, China and India were among the world's richest countries. They were also preeminent in Asian trade. However, from the 15th century, China is said to have restricted overseas contacts and retreated into isolation. China's reduced role and the rising importance of the Americas gradually moved the center of world trade westwards. Europe now emerged as the center of world trade in the 19th century, 1815 to 1914. The world changed profoundly in the 19th century. Economic, political, social, cultural and technological factors interacted in complex ways to transform societies and reshape external relations.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description, and please subscribe to show your support.
Economists identify three types of movement or flows within international economic exchanges. The first is the flow of trade, which in the 19th century referred largely to trade in goods, for example, cloth or wheat. The second is the flow of labor, the migration of people in search of employment. The third is the movement of capital for short-term or long-term investments over long distances. All three flows were closely interwoven and affected people's lives more deeply now than ever before. The interconnections could sometimes be broken. For example, labor migration was often more restricted than goods or capital flows. Yet it helps us understand the 19th century world economy better if we look at the three flows together. A world economy takes shape. A good place to start is the changing pattern of food production and consumption in industrial Europe. Traditionally, countries liked to be self-sufficient in food, but in 19th century Britain, self-sufficiency in food meant lower living standards and social conflict. Why was this so? Population growth from the late 18th century had increased the demand for food grains in Britain. As urban centers expanded and industry grew, the demand for agricultural products went up, pushing up food grain prices. Under pressure from landed groups, the government also restricted the import of corn. The laws allowing the government to do this were commonly known as the Corn Laws. Unhappy with high food prices, industrialists and urban dwellers forced the abolition of the Corn Laws. After the Corn Laws were scrapped, food could be imported into Britain more cheaply than it could be produced within the country. British agriculture was unable to compete with imports. Vast areas of land were now left uncultivated, and thousands of men and women were thrown out of work. They flocked to the cities or migrated overseas. As food prices fell, consumption in Britain rose. From the mid-19th century, faster industrial growth in Britain also led to higher incomes, and therefore more food imports. Around the world, in Eastern Europe, Russia, America and Australia, lands were cleared and food production expanded to meet the British demand. It was not enough merely to clear lands for agriculture. Railways were needed to link the agricultural regions to the ports. New harbors had to be built and old ones expanded to ship the new cargoes. People had to settle on the lands to bring them under cultivation. This meant building homes and settlements. All these activities in turn required capital and labor. Capital flowed from financial centers such as London. The demand for labor in places where labor was in short supply, as in America and Australia, led to more migration. Nearly 50 million people emigrated from Europe to America and Australia in the 19th century. All over the world, some 150 million are estimated to have left their homes, crossed oceans and vast distances over land in search of a better future. Thus by 1890, a global agricultural economy had taken shape, accompanied by complex changes in labor movement patterns, capital flows, ecologies and technology.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description, and please subscribe to show your support.
Food no longer came from a nearby village or town, but from thousands of miles away. It was not grown by a peasant tilling his own land, but by an agricultural worker, perhaps recently arrived, who is now working on a large farm that only a generation ago had most likely been a forest. It was transported by railway, built for that very purpose, and by ships which were increasingly manned in these decades by low-paid workers from southern Europe, Asia, Africa and the Caribbean. Some of this dramatic change, though on a smaller scale, occurred closer home in West Punjab. Here the British Indian government built a network of irrigation canals to transform semi-desert wastes into fertile agricultural lands that could grow wheat and cotton for export. The canal colonies, as the areas irrigated by the new canals were called, were settled by peasants from other parts of Punjab. Of course, food is merely an example. A similar story can be told for cotton, the cultivation of which expanded worldwide to feed British textile mills, or rubber. Indeed, so rapidly did regional specialization in the production of commodities develop, that between 1820 and 1914 world trade is estimated to have multiplied 25 to 40 times. Nearly 60% of this trade comprised primary products, that is, agricultural products such as wheat and cotton, and minerals such as coal. Role of technology. What was the role of technology in all this? The railways, steamships, the telegraph, for example, were important inventions without which we cannot imagine the transformed 19th century world, but technological advances were often the result of larger social, political and economic factors. For example, colonization stimulated new investments and improvements in transport. Faster railways, lighter wagons and larger ships helped move food more cheaply and quickly from faraway farms to final markets. The trade in meat offers a good example of this connected process. Till the 1870s, animals were shipped live from America to Europe and then slaughtered when they arrived there. But live animals took up a lot of ship space. Many also died in voyage, fell ill, lost weight, or became unfit to eat. Meat was hence an expensive luxury beyond the reach of the European poor. High prices in turn kept demand and production down until the development of a new technology, namely, refrigerated ships, which enabled the transport of perishable foods over long distances. Now animals were slaughtered for food at the starting point, in America, Australia or New Zealand, and then transported to Europe as frozen meat. This reduced shipping costs and lowered meat prices in Europe. The poor in Europe could now consume a more varied diet.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description, and please subscribe to show your support. Thank you and happy learning.